All right, so we are in the last parak of Maseches Shabbos. Unbelievable. Spent a year and a half on Maseches Shabbos, and we are at the finish line. It's amazing accomplishment. What are you guys up to on Mondays?
We went over chapter 23.
Perfect. So you guys only have one more chapter remaining. So for today, what we'll do is I wanted to see the last two Mishnayos in the Masechta, and then next week we might have one more shear on Masechta Shabbos, or maybe we'll do something related to Purim and.
I thought we were going to go back and do Pesachim.
And then we're going to go do Pesachim. Exactly. Yeah. So either we're going to start Pesachim this coming week. I just want to give you guys time to finish up the Masechta before we start the next one. So either we'll start Pesachim a week from today, or we'll do something else to give us a little more time to kind of wrap up Masechta Shabbos. But today, the last two Mishnahs in the Masechta are really jam-packed. There's a lot to discuss, and let's just jump right in. So the Mishnah, the second class Mishnah has the following: So one is allowed to on Shabbos cut up a raw gourd, even though it's not edible because it needs to be cooked. It's not edible for me to eat, but I could prepare it for my animal. That seems to be agreed upon by everybody. That let's say my animal, needs to eat something that is not considered, people food, or it's not prepared for people food. So I could prepare that for my animal. Now here's where the Gemara here's where the Mishnah gets into a machlokas. The es hanavela, but a nevela, an animal that is dead. So the details over here would be that it's a carcass of an animal that died on Shabbos. Because if it died before Shabbos, then we wouldn't have an issue over here. There's nothing wrong with raw meat on Shabbos. That's not considered moksa. Here, the question that the Mishnah is dealing with is, if an animal died on Shabbos, would it be considered moksa? Now, what can I do with an animal that died on Shabbos? Well, I can give it to my animals to eat. According to Rabbi Shimon, I can give the carcass to my dogs to eat. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Im lo haisa nevela me'erev Shabbos." If it was not a carcass before Shabbos, meaning it was alive, asura, then it's forbidden. Lefi she'ena min hamuchan, because it's not prepared. Now, this is the famous machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda that we've seen a couple of times already in the Masechta. It comes up like one every 15 dapim. It's funny because there are two very, very famous machlokas found in Masechta Shabbos between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and each of them come up like one every 15 dapim. It's unbelievable. So it's like Masechta Shabbos was really built around the lectures of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. It's an unbelievable thing. So there's a discussion regarding moksa. Frankly, the machlokas is even if there is such a thing as moksa, where Reb Shimon says that there is no such thing as moksa, which we are going to redefine in a moment exactly what that is. We'll review what moksa is defined as. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, of course there's such thing as moksa. So what is the definition of moksa? What is moksa? So moksa, and I think Jack sent an article as a good review to everyone when the last time we discussed this in depth when we were doing, I think, probably the 17th chapter, highlighting the laws of moksa. But really what moksa means, what the word means, is set aside. So something that is set aside for meaning that I can't really use it on Shabbos. It's set aside for the rest of the week. There's nothing I can do with it on Shabbos. It really serves no purpose to me. So then the rabbis instituted that one is not allowed to move it. That is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Shimon says no, there's no such thing. The classic example that they discuss is, let's say, the following. They talk about grogros vitzimukim. You have, let's say, grapes that are in the process of turning into raisins. So you have the grapes drying out on your rooftop. So when they're good and delicious, ripe grapes, so then they're delicious and they're perfectly good to eat. When they are dried out raisins, they're delicious dried out raisins. The interim state, they're not really so enjoyable. That's something that no one is ever going to eat and voluntarily decide that this is the snack I'm going to eat today. Half and half grape, half raisin, not so delicious, not non-starter. So the question is, well, let's say these grogros v'tzimukim, I wanted to I want to be able to eat them on Shabbos. Now, obviously, I can't heat up the drying process, but let's say something happened that caused them to get dried out on Shabbos itself. So what would something like that be? Let's take a crazy example, okay? A crazy example would be lightning comes and hits the grapes as they are in the middle of drying out, okay? And it finishes the drying process. Let's think of some crazy example, okay? But whatever the example would be, somehow these grapes ended up becoming raisins on Shabbos, okay? So they weren't edible going into Shabbos. On Shabbos itself, they became edible. Says Rabbi Shimon that you can eat them. Rabbi Yehuda says that if something was huksa, b'vein hashmashos, huksa l'kol yom kula, that if something was muksa going into Shabbos, so then it remains muksa throughout Shabbos. Okay, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, no, ain't muksa. There's no such thing as muksa. Now, this machlokas comes afore over here as well. The gourd is an example the Mishnah starts with that everyone agrees to. That the gourd is, at this point, something that only the animals can eat, that I can't eat. But it seems like it was set aside before Shabbos for animal food, right? So everyone's going to agree in the case with the gourd that I can give it to my animals. The question is going to be the carcass. If the animal was dead going into Shabbos, so then it was already set aside for the animal on Shabbos. However, if it was not and it died on Shabbos, so before Shabbos, this animal was muktzah. Why was the animal muktzah going into Shabbos? Because on Shabbos, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because on Shabbos, am I able to eat this animal? No. Can I give it to my animal before it dies? No. So if that's the case, it's muktzah. I can't shecht it. Okay. So machlokas rishonim what exactly the reason is, but let's just let's be simplistic about it, right? The Rashba says I can't shecht it. If I can't shecht it, so then it's muktzah. There's a Rashi in Maseches Beitza that explains that the issue is Avram and Achai. The reason why is because of the issue of eating a live animal. But it's more simplistic to just take the approach of either way, I can't consume this animal on Shabbos because it's alive. If that's the case, it's muktzah on Shabbos. If it's muktzah on Shabbos, I can't give it to my animal now that it dies because it's muktzah. This is the approach of Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Shimon says, no, what do you mean? There's no such thing as muktzah. Granted, on Shabbos itself, while the animal's alive, there's nothing I can do with it. But once it dies, sure, give it to your animals. Why not? The Rishonim, though, really the Gemara, here and also in Psachim, Beitza, learn from this Gemara actually something that we even extend this within the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Yehuda is teaching us an additional element of muktzah. almost an even more stringent view than we had beforehand. That Rabbi Yehuda is adding another piece to the Moksa puzzle, that not only will we say that if something is not, let's say something you can't benefit from, but your animals can benefit from, are we still going to call that Moksa? Ask Tosfos the following. Tosfos says that the Gemara in Psachim, and also in Beitza, learn Mehach Masnisen. We learned from this Mishnah that Muchan la'adam lo have Muchan la'klavim, that something can potentially be set aside for you that is not set aside for your animals, and vice versa. Something can be set aside for your animals that's not set aside for you. Now, says Tosfos, that is what we learned from Rabbi Yehuda over here. Now, how are we learning this from Rabbi Yehuda? Because that's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you could have something that is set aside for your animals going to Shabbos, but being that you can't get any benefit from it. I'm sorry. What we learn from here, what we learn from here is that if you can't get benefit from it, then therefore it is still considered muksa for you. Meaning you could have gone into Shabbos saying, you know what, this animal is set aside. This animal, live animal, is set aside for my dog. Why? Because if it dies, I'm going to be able to give it to my animal. But no, because being that you can't set aside a live animal for yourself, therefore you can't set it aside for your animal either. That's what this extension of Rabbi Yehuda is assuming. So says Tosfos, the reason it's going to be prohibited to the dogs, mishum dahave muksa, machmas iser, because of the prohibition of muksa, in that I am not able to shecht it. I can't do anything with it while it's alive. So if that's the case, why is it that we could extend from here that if something is not set aside for you, that it has the then that means it can't be set aside for your animals? This is the question that Tosfos is dealing with. V'teretz Ri, the Ri gives the following answer. Now, he says that there could be scenarios that you could actually give something to your animal that is not set aside for you. Let's say, like for example, I think for a cat, let's say, would be a good example. A small baby chicken, a small chick. So a cat would go crazy for that on Shabbos. You can give that to your cat, or your cat will go hunt for it. You could. Why not? It's perfectly good food for your cat. For you, there's nothing you can benefit from it because it's alive. In that scenario, even while it's alive, I could set it aside for my cat. I can even use this live animal on Shabbos, meaning we came up with a scenario where a live animal that I can't eat is not going to be muksa for me. That's what the Reis explains over here. Well, what really comes out from here is a nuanced definition within Rabbi Yehuda's understanding of muksa, in that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no such thing as muksa in a vacuum. That once it's muksa, then every potential scenario is muksa. If something could be set aside, even though there's another scenario and 99% of the scenarios are not going to be like that, and that we are going to treat them as muksa, there could be scenarios that we will say, no, we are not going to treat this as muksa. Meaning that we sometimes use a rabbinic principle called lo plug, that because there are a number of cases that would cause us to be stringent, therefore we're just going to be stringent in every similar scenario, in order so that people don't make mistakes. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not the way he seems to be viewing muksa. Muksa is not a low plug. It's not just going to be a blatant across-the-board prohibition where in every single like scenario we're gonna be machmer and treat it as muksa. Not true. We take each case subjectively. That seems to be the approach of Rabbi Yehuda and what Tosfos wants to bring out from this Mishnah. Okay, next Mishnah. Next Mishnah. In this next Mishnah, we're going to see something quite practical. It says the Mishnah the following. The very last Mishnah in Masechah Shabbos, Mafir Nidarim b'Shabbos, that someone is allowed to annul vows on Shabbos. Now, when we say annul vows on Shabbos, we don't mean setting up a bezdin on Shabbos to be matir a neder. If I recall correctly, pull it up. Pretty sure the Gemara Nidarim deals with that, Chafez or something like that, about being matir neder on Shabbos. See. So here we're not talking about being matir a neder. Now there's a difference, a major difference between being matir a neder and being mefer a neder. Being matir a neder is the following, is what we do before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur every single year, where someone took an oath and the oath is in place, and now they want to absolve that oath. So that's the concept of being matir a neder, that we are allowing an oath to be absolved. Beis din is nulling the vow, okay, nullifying the vow. They say that Rabbi Soloveitchik once mixed up his calendar, and he mistakenly thought that, let's say, I don't know, let's say Asar B'Teves was a Wednesday, okay, and he thought it was a Tuesday. So he comes to Shir on Tuesday morning, and he says good morning, and okay, and I hope everyone has a meaningful fast or something like that. And they say, Rebbe, the fast is not today, it's tomorrow. And he said, really? He said, yeah, it's tomorrow. So the Rav said, well, I'm fasting today. So the students kind of looked around not knowing what to do, because he's already in a fast, and a fast is a neder, that he took a vow, right? He has to fast. So the Rav looks at the students and says to them, can you be matir my neder? Now absolve my vow, right? So he had a bezdin sitting right there, right? It's a group of many students sitting in the room, right? So they can act as a bezdin to be matir his neder. So they said mutar lach, and they matir his neder. And this is a real halachic principle, that we are able to be matir an neder. Now it's interesting, being matir an neder is actually does not, there is no basis in the text for being matir an neder, of absolving a vow. There is there are textual sources found in the Torah in Parshas Matos about being mefer a neder, which we'll talk about in a second. But being matir a neder, what we do with a bezdin, that is all learned from Halacha Moshe Missinai. Everything that exists in the laws of Nedarim have to do with the fact that if you take a neder, then it works, and then how there are scenarios where someone else can take away your vow or not allow it to take effect in the first place. But removing a vow once it's taken effect, that is not something that we have a precedent for in the written Torah. And this actually is picked up by the Gemara in Chagiga, I believe on Daf Yud. The Gemara says that there are certain things that are porchem ba'avir, that I think it says heter nedarim porchem ba'avir, that the laws of being matir and neder are like flying in the wind, meaning that there is no there's nothing tangible that you could hold on to and point to and say, this is the source for being matir a neder. It is something that is straight from our oral tradition with no textual basis to back it up. Here we go. This is exactly what the Mishnah says in Maseches Chagiga on Daf Yud. Heter nedarim parchim ba'avir. That the laws of being mater and eder, of absolving an eder, are parchim ba'avir, are learned from rabbinic literature, not from Torah, literature, not from biblical literature. Mefer an eder is something else. Being mefer an eder is what the Torah tells us in Parshas Matos. The Torah says the following. Okay. The Torah says the following. That if, let's say, someone takes a neder, they take a vow, a girl takes a vow. Let's say she is living in her father's home. She's not yet married, underage, not yet married, and she takes a vow. Or she is married. So then either her husband or her father are able to be mefer her neder. That on the day that you hear the neder that your wife took or that your daughter took, all the things that she said, lindareha, isar nafsha, in order to make a prohibition against herself, lo yakum isha, that the neder she tried to take are not going to work, hafarim, they are absolved, meaning that there is a ownership over the vows or the oaths that a woman takes in her marriage by her husband, that her husband can decide whether or not the vow is going to take effect. If he decides it's not going to take effect, so then it is not going to take effect. That's called being made for a neder. So what the Mishnah over here is talking about, it says that if a woman decides that she's going to take a neder on Shabbos, so then Mefer nedarim b'Shabbos, the husband has the right to absolve the neder on Shabbos. V'nishal nedarim, and you could be mater a neder on Shabbos as well. Go to a chacham to absolve your neder. Shehein l'tzarach Shabbos, as long as it's necessary for Shabbos. Let's say, for example, a person on Shabbos takes a neder, I'm not going to eat today. That's really a shvua. I'm not going to eat today. So you can go to the Bezdin, you can convene a Bezdin on Shabbos and say, I made a neder to not eat today, but it is Shabbos today. So that is l'tzarach Shabbos, and therefore you can convene the Bezdin in order to absolve my neder on Shabbos. Upoken es hamaor, says the Gemara, you can also close a shutter on Shabbos, even though it may look like building on Shabbos. Umodin es matlis, you can take measurements of a cloth, whether or not it's going to be susceptible to tuma. Umodin es hamikvah, you can measure a mikvah. Says the Gemara, Maisa b'yamei aviv shel Rabbi Tzadok b'yamei Abba Shmuel ben Bitnis shepifku es ma'or b'tafiach, that they closed up a window with a flask. The kashu es ha makida, we're going to get to that in a second, the gemi, and they tied an earthenware pot with a reed. Lida im yesh bagigis pachos poseach tefach imla, in order to know whether or not there is a square tefach at the opening of the barrel. Okay, this is all discussed in the Gemara. And from here we learn that one is allowed to tie and measure on Shabbos. Wow, and tie knots on Shabbos. Well, hold on one second. You're allowed to tie knots on Shabbos? No, you're not. That's one of the 39 malachos. What's going on over here? So the Gemara explains, and as is elucidated by the Rishonim as well, that Over here, the kesher that was done, the knot that was tied with a gemi, with a reed. By definition, that makes it a kesher she'eno shel kayama, not a long-lasting kesher. It's not sustainable. It's not going to last a very long time. You took a reed and you tied it. That's not going to last a very long time. It's not a professional form of a knot. It is lacking some of the integral components of being a bona fide kesher, a knot. It's not, with just minus the K, it isn't a knot that is a real kesher, or what we would call an aniva. What's an aniva? That is a bow, a bow that you tie, which is easily pulled out. That's not even called a knot at all. That is not a knot. That is not a tie. What is that? That is just a bow that you could pull out with one string. That's how we tie our shoes. Okay? So those are the two extremes on Shabbos. One of them is completely mutter. Tying your shoes is completely okay. Having a bona fide knot is a prohibition. The discussion is about a rabbinic knot, meaning that you tied a real knot, but it is not a lasting one. It's a kesher she'eno shel kayama. It's not going to last. Like the material you used is not sustainable, like in our scenario. So that's a rabbinic prohibition. But over here, the Mishnah is telling me that for l'tzorech mitzvah, I can rely on the rabbinic prohibition of tying a knot. This is also cited in the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah. In Perek Yud in Hilchos Shabbos, the Rambam says, "Muter likshar kesher she'eno shel kayama l'dvar mitzvah." One is allowed, when it's permissible, to tie a not permanent knot with a K on Shabbos for the sake of a mitzvah. Torah, in order to check the size of something, okay, etc. So what you see over here from the Rambam is that there would be nothing wrong with tying a knot that is a kesher shel that a kesher she'ena shel kayama if it is not permanent. So now the question is why? Generally speaking, we don't just allow rabbinic prohibition for the sake of a mitzvah. We don't. In fact, this is one of the few examples that would be an exception to that. We don't allow you to, just for the sake of a mitzvah, absolve rabbinic law. What we do have, which is accepted by everybody, like the Gemara in Gittin has on Daf Ches, as quoted in the Tosfos in Gittin on Daf Ches, cited the halacha by the Tosfos in Gittin on Daf Ches, and also cited the halacha by Tosfos in Beitza on Daf Lamed Vav, where there is a concept of shvus de shvus, a double derabanan, a rabbinic law on top of rabbinic law, for the sake of a mitzvah. I'll give an example that I think we've discussed in the past before. Let's say turning off a light is a rabbinic prohibition. Having a non-Jew do it for you would be asking a non-Jew to violate rabbinic prohibition. For the sake of a mitzvah, that would be okay. For example, I left the light on in my fridge on Shabbos. I can ask a non-Jew to unscrew the light bulb in order so that, right, that would be the asking a non-Jew, which would be a rabbinic prohibition, to do a rabbinic prohibition, so knocking it down twice in its level of seriousness for the sake of a mitzvah. But only one derabanan, violating a shvus, a derabanan, for the sake of a mitzvah. Why would we allow such a thing? So the Avnei Nezer, the Sakachav Rebbe, Rav Avram Bornstein of Sakachav, passed away he lived from 1838 to 1910, I believe, if I have my dates correct. But the Sakachav Rebbe explains the following. Let's see, the Avnei Nezer. He lived. Oh, it's not on my list. Okay, that's surprising. So the Avnei Nezer, the Sakachav Rebbe, explains the following. Who, by the way, Reb Chaim referred to the Sakachav Rebbe as a super genius. So we're talking about Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, right? The revolutionary of modern Talmudic analysis. Arguably the smartest person to live in the last 100 years. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, who, by the way, I don't know if we can say 100 years anymore. Didn't Rabbi Chaim pass away I think he passed away in 1918, which means that we're already past his 100th year yahrzeit. But anyway, he referred to the Avnei Nezer as a super genius because he was a super genius. The Avnei Nezer explains as follows, that we know, and we've discussed many times, and this is a good postscript to Masechah Shabbos, and now we're concluding, that with regard to violating Shabbos, we know that the number one principle that needs to be met, the number one condition that needs to be met is meleches machashavos, that you need to violate Shabbos through a purposeful activity. If you're not mindful about what you're doing, if you're not purposeful about what you're doing, if it's not something that is a lasting, it's not artisan work, there's a number of definitions that go behind what is considered meleches machshavos, but you did the labor for the sake of the labor, etc., that would be violating Shabbos in its most perfect sense, or imperfect sense. In order to violate rabbinic prohibitions, also there needs to be meleches machshavos. If there isn't meleches machshavos, that is just part of the definition of violating Shabbos. It's going to apply to rabbinic prohibitions as well. So says the Sakhachever Rebbe like this: the rabbis instituted that you are not allowed to tie a kesher she'eino shel kayama. You're not allowed to tie a knot that isn't going to last. Okay, but let's say I don't tie it for its purpose, but I tie it for another purpose. I tie it for another purpose. Okay, I'm not tying the knot for the sake of tying the knot, even though it's not kayama, but I'm tying it for another purpose. You know what that's called? That's called a malacha she'ena tricha lagufa. Doing a malacha not for its purpose, for another purpose, which the Gemara tells us is a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda whether or not malacha she'ena tricha lagufa is an iser derabanan or not. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's not, because that is not considered malachas machshavos. That if I do a malacha for not its purpose, let's say I dig a hole not because I want a hole, but rather because I want dirt. So that would not be, according to Rav Shimon, an issur d'oraisa, even though I'm making furrows in the ground. Why? Because I'm not doing it for its intended purpose. I'm doing it for a different purpose. Therefore, it's not considered meleches machshavos. Meleches machshavos is relatively irrational, right? It is part of a broader definition of violating Shabbos. So anything outside of that rubric is not going to be considered a violation of Shabbos. So therefore, says Reb Shimon, if you do a malacha not for its purpose, that's called malacha she'eina tricha lagufa. So comes along the Avnei Nezer and he says, here we find a malacha she'eina tricha lagufa on a derabanan, because you're violating the malacha of kosher, of tying, not for its purpose, but for another purpose, for the sake of a mitzvah. Once you're doing it not for its purpose, but for the sake of a mitzvah, which would be considered a malacha she'eina tricha lagufa, so on a derabanan, according to the Rambam, and what would seem like to be obvious from the Mishnah already, that we don't even consider that to be a prohibition. We consider that completely mutter. That malacha she'eina tricha lagufa on a derabanan, completely okay. In fact, there's a Ran, it's the very last Ran in the 14th chapter of Masechah Shabbos, where the Ran says we apply the same logic to malacha she'eina tricha lagufa on a tolda, which is a subcategory of a principled malacha. There's no such thing as a malacha she'eina tricha lagufa on a tolda. That, by definition, a tolda is something that is a malacha that is being done already for a different purpose. Now you're tacking on another malacha she'eina tricha lagufa on top of that. So therefore it comes along the Avnei Nezer and says that's why kesher is going to be this exception. That when you do it for the sake of a mitzvah, so you're going to be off the hook. Because again, by definition, the knot that you're doing here is one that is a malacha she'eina tricha lagufa on top of rabbinic law. Then you don't have anything to worry about. Malacha she'eina tricha lagufa on the derabanan you don't have to worry about it. Like we have a psik reisha on a derabanan. Psik reisha is where we say that even though it's not your intent, it's certainly happening, and you know it's happening. Therefore, it's impossible to get around malachas machshavas. That does not apply to rabbinic law, because by rabbinic law, the rabbis institute that you can't do this for this purpose, but I'm doing it for a completely different purpose. That's already going to upshot. It's going to skirt the whole issue, and therefore it is going to be completely mutter. This is how we view this concept of malachas machshavas. This is how far we take this concept of malachas machshavas, and it's really it is an irrational principle that is applied to the laws of Shabbos. Okay, and this finds itself in, we've already come across this topic so many times throughout the Masechta. This is a Shas topic. We're going to come across it in other Masechtas also, but it's a good way to cap off Masechta Shabbos. All right. We will stop here. Next week, either we will do one more class on Masechta Shabbos, or we will already jump into Masechta Pesachim. But I would assume we're going to probably get into either something Masechta Shabbos or maybe Purim related, so that way you guys can have one more week to finish up the Masechta. I also have a couple Mishnahs I need to complete. All right, we'll stop here for now.
Thank you.